Back in March, we made several videos about Europe's response to Trump's war in Iran and how it might pose a problem for Europe's MAGA-aligned hard-right parties. Then in April, a European MAGA ally suffered a bruising defeat, with Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán ousted at the Hungarian election, despite a public endorsement from US Vice President J.D. Vance. More recently, this MAGA alliance with MEGA, Make Europe Great Again, has crept back into the news cycle, with The Guardian reporting last month that the US State Department intends to grant $12 million to UK-based conservative organisations promoting, quote, free speech, as well as millions of dollars worth of grants to European organisations seeking to, quote, address national sovereignty, migration, censorship and lawfare challenges in line with our shared political philosophy, law, and our common Western civilizational heritage. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the relationship between MAGA and Europe's hard right, and how it's changing. There's a candidate for the French election who's bounced back from an embezzlement conviction and a 5-year ban. The new issue of our magazine has all of the details you need to understand how Marine Le Pen might beat the odds in the 2027 election. That's just one of the articles in our longest issue ever. Subscribe to get your copy by clicking the link in the description. So let's start with the links between the MAGA movement and Europe's hard right. Essentially, there's sort of a transatlantic ideological alliance between Trump's Republican Party and the European hard right. Both sides oppose mass migration, modern multiculturalism, and DEI initiatives, while promoting conservative ideals about gender roles and the family, as well as defending Western civilization. For Europe's hard-right parties, aligning with MAGA raises their profile and gives them international legitimacy, while for MAGA, the European hard-right offers a model of anti-establishment politics and a liberal government, like Orbán's Hungary. As such, Trump's 2024 election victory was celebrated by much of the European hard-right. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni predicted the US-Italy relationship would grow even stronger, while the leader of Alternative for Germany, or AfD, Alice Weidel, called Trump a model for us. Others, however, were more cautious. One pre-election YouGov poll found that supporters of two European hard-right parties, France's National Rally and the Sweden Democrats, actually wanted the Democrats' Kamala Harris to win, likely because they thought Trump's EU tariffs would end up hurting their own economies too. Anyway, since taking office, Trump has become increasingly unpopular in Europe, even among radical right voters. Trump's US-EU trade war in April 2025, his persistent threats to militarily annex Greenland, and the joint US-Israeli strikes on Iran in 2026 went down poorly across Europe. In the early weeks of the war, Trump criticised European governments for refusing to join, accusing France of being, quote, very unhelpful, and describing then UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer as, quote, not Winston Churchill. Then in April, MAGA suffered its biggest electoral blow in Europe, losing Trump ally and role model Viktor Orbán in Hungary. For context, Orbán, who proudly described Hungary as an illiberal state, had overseen a 16-year period of democratic backsliding and repeatedly blocked EU aid packages for Ukraine. However, despite support from Trump's Vice President J.D. Vance, who travelled to Budapest to endorse Orbán and accused the EU of, quote, one of the worst examples of foreign election interference he had ever seen, Orbán was ultimately ousted, depriving MAGA of its staunchest European ally. Looking at the wider picture though, MAGA seems to be slowly losing influence over European politics for several reasons. The first is that Trump himself has become a political liability to the European hard right. A Politico Public First poll from December 2025 found that in France and Germany, radical right-wing voters were split fairly evenly into thirds in terms of their viewing him positively, neither positively nor negatively, or negatively. While in the UK, 50% of Reform UK voters viewed Trump positively. 8 months later, however, this balance has shifted. A Pew Research Center poll published in late June found that supporters of right-wing populist parties across Europe now have between 10 and 30 points less confidence in Trump to, quote, do the right thing regarding world affairs than they did in 2025, with the steepest declines in Greece and Italy. This also tracks a more general trend among European voters. Since late 2025, Trump's favourability in Western Europe has steadily fallen, with the sharpest decline in Italy. Meloni, previously a Trump ally, has now effectively fallen out with Trump. Firstly, over the war in Iran, with Italy refusing the US permission to use its Sicily airbase to launch attacks, and secondly, over what Meloni described as Trump's unacceptable comments about the Pope, who Trump described as weak on crime and terrible on foreign policy. This sparked outrage in Italy, a 70% Catholic nation, with former Italian Prime Minister Matteo Renzi describing the AI-generated Jesus-like image that Trump posted as blasphemous. The second way that MAGA is losing Europe is that European hard-right parties, including previously Eurosceptic ones, seem to be increasingly buying into the idea of a collective European interest and shunning American nationalism. One example of this is Ukraine. Given Europe's geographical exposure to Russian aggression, even hard-right parties like Meloni's Brothers of Italy have been pro-Ukraine, whereas MAGA and the US are less immediately impacted. Likewise, with Iran, Europe is more exposed to regional fallout, which has made hard-right figures reluctant to support Trump's war, and in some cases, encouraged them to openly criticize Trump. For instance, in July, French National Rally leader Marine Le Pen told France Culture that Trump had previously told party members that he would break with US imperialism, but that ultimately, quote, he had done exactly the opposite of what he had promised. Finally, MAGA seems to be losing influence in Europe precisely because it's trying so hard to influence it. Essentially, MAGA sees Europe as kind of the origin story of the West, and Western civilization more broadly. But this obsession with Europe seems to be backfiring. The Trump administration's intense efforts to influence European politics, through highly critical ex-posts, donations to hard-right think tanks, or attacks on specific leaders or governments, has instead raised concerns about US influence over European politicians, via money or other support. This is especially a problem for European nationalist parties, whose entire political platform is to decide their own country's future without external influence. Ultimately, this slow political divergence between MAGA and the European hard right seems to have led many in the US to try a new tactic, importing and then re-exporting the idea of remigration back to Europe in order to revive the transatlantic far-right alliance. For context, back in November 2023, a conference of far-right activists was held in Potsdam, Germany, attended by some members of Germany's AfD party, alongside neo-Nazis and other extremists. This involved discussions about remigration, the mass deportation of people, including European citizens with immigrant backgrounds, and sparked huge protests against far-right extremists. In recent months, however, the idea of remigration, something that's long been considered taboo, if not outright extremist, has apparently crept increasingly into the European political mainstream. Italy saw a huge anti-migrant march in June in favour of the Remigration and Reconquest Citizens Initiative. And in Brussels in July, two far-right activists arrived at the European Commission with 500,000 signatures calling for remigration to be registered as a European Citizens Initiative. This idea, now given increased prominence by MAGA, seems to be the US's latest effort to re-energize the transatlantic far right, as European figures retreat from openly aligning themselves with Trump. I've already told you about one of the articles in the next issue of Too Long, but there's so much more inside that you're going to want to discover. So if you subscribe using code SUMMER26, you'll not only get 20% off every issue as a subscriber, you'll also get an additional £3 off your first copy, bringing the cost as low as $4.99 for a digital edition. And yes, if shipping, or increasingly tariffs, are making deliveries to wherever you live a little bit expensive, you can get a digital version sent straight to your inbox. Plus, we actually earn more from the digital editions, as we actually lose money on shipping, so it's also a better way to support the channel. This is a good first issue to jump on board with too. It's our longest ever at 84 pages and contains stories from all across the world, including Burnham here in the UK, the wars in Ukraine and Iran, China and the US's relationship, a bit from the Vatican, and of course, our cover story on the plan to rebuild Europe. It also features articles from our superb new writers, Natasha, Isaac, and Ebba. So make sure to use code SUMMER26 at checkout and become a Too Long subscriber today.